السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to another episode of Gems of the Heart, where we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts, these hearts, amazing creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that needs to be purified. If we leave it alone, it will be contaminated. It's like your apartment, your house. It's like our body. It does not have that self-cleaning system. We have to clean ourselves. We have to clean the place that we live in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us this way. He subhanahu wa ta'ala could have created us in such a way that our bodies cleans itself, or our homes get cleaned by itself, by wishful thinking, for example, or just looking at it and it becomes clean. We have to clean, and we have to constantly clean. And the same thing, which is even more important than all of this, is to clean our hearts. And these hearts, the same way we clean our physical body, we have to make sure that our hearts are clean. That means the same way that we take a shower, we wash ourselves, we put effort and we buy things to clean ourselves, and for us not to smell bad in front of those who are close to us and those who are strangers and so on. More importantly is to clean our hearts. There's always this physical actions or physical body versus what's in the hearts. The people, the human beings, when they're not attached to the revelation from Allah, they will give more attention to their physical appearance, to their physical likings, to their desires of this worldly gain and materialistic matters and so on. And they will give less importance to what's in their hearts. And for the believers, they have the balance between what's in their hearts and their outside appearance and their physical actions. And the hearts is the foundation of all goodness that appears in their speech and actions. And this is something that we have to be aware of. The same thing when it comes to when someone is sick. What terrifies the people the most? Is it the physical sickness or the sickness and the diseases of the heart? Not the physical heart, but the diseases of the heart, like shirk, associating partners with Allah, like arrogance, like envy, like hatred, and so on and so forth. What's worse to the bodies? What is the thing that a person should run away from more and foremost? That is the diseases of the heart. And the same thing, we take the means for all kinds of cure physically and non-physically. So the way to purify our hearts, the way to cure our hearts from the diseases in it, the way to adorn our hearts with all kinds of beauty, this has to be done through the revelation from Allah, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That this Quran comes down with cure and mercy to the believers. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify and to cure our hearts from all its diseases. And we've been talking about one of the most important and effective way to purify our hearts, and that is talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His names and attributes. And knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His names and attributes and how it's mentioned in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, having the knowledge of it, the meanings of it, and how to implement this in our life, and how does that affect our life, and how we act according to this name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that we constantly need to work on, knowledge that we need to learn, so that to purify our hearts for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the name Al-Muhaymen. Al-Muhaymen. And if you are someone that recites Ayatul Kursi every salah, at the end of every salah, after every salah, which is from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, something that we all do after we finish the obligatory salah, we recite Ayatul Kursi. And Ayatul Kursi is the most virtuous verse in the entire Quran, by the statement of the Prophet ﷺ. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum, la ta'khuduhu sinatun wa la nawm, lahu ma fi as-samawati wa ma fi al-ard, man dha alladhi yashfa'u 'indahu illa bi'idhnihi, ya'lamu ma bayna aydihim wa ma khalfahum, wa la yuhituna bi shay'in min 'ilmihi illa bima sha'a. وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. This is Ayatul Kursi, the most virtuous verse in the Quran. We say it after each obligatory salah. And within the meanings of this verse, Ayatul Kursi, there is the meaning of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Muhaymen. It's not mentioned there, but this is the meaning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being Al-Hafiz, being the one that is overseer over things. He's the one that is the all protector from all things. He subhanahu wa ta'ala is near to his slaves with his power subhanahu wa ta'ala and his knowledge, and he overpowers all things because he's the owner of all things. But the name Al-Muhaymen is mentioned specifically, directly, clearly in Surah Al-Hashr, and the end of Surah Al-Hashr. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَاللَّهُ الَّذِي لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ الْمَلِكُ الْقُدُّوسُ السَّلَامُ الْمُؤْمِنُ الْمُهَيْمِنُ الْعَزِيزُ الْجَبَّارُ الْمُتَكَبِّرُ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Mu'min Al-Muhaymin. Al-Muhaymin means, and there are many meanings to it, as they translate it to be the overseer, the one that oversees all things and everything. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is the most trustworthy, and He is the one that would protect His slaves, and He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to be trusted in all of one's affairs, because He is the witness of all things. And when someone also is in that state or that characteristic, that means they overtake something, they guard it, they witness it, they become overseeing all things. And that's why a believer, when they believe in this, it has a great effect in their hearts. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned with regards to one of the characteristics of the Quran. That one of the characteristics of the Quran, that it's muhayminan alay. That means it has this it overpowers all things before it. It overtakes all things before it. That means all of the previous books that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, all the meanings in it, all the powerful verses in it, it's mentioned and it's present in the book of Allah and more. Meaning the Quran. The Quran has all of the things, all the meanings that people are in need of that used to be present in the previous books, and more. That is perfect revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to all human beings till the Day of Judgment. So this is basically what some of the meanings of Al-Muhaymin, or the meaning of that word itself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the overseer, and He's the all protector subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that witnesses and sees all of His creation, and He's the one that would reward them or punish subhanahu wa ta'ala, reward them by His mercy subhanahu wa ta'ala, and punish by the justice of Allah. And those, the believers, those who they receive the rewards from Allah, it would never cease for them for any reason. It's not going to be like terminated because of some deficiency, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most perfect. If He promises, He fulfills His promise, and everything is under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most powerful. So with these meanings of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Muhaymin, it's with the many different meanings, as the ulama they mentioned, comes also the effect of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows all things and He's overseeing all things, and that's therefore He is seeing all the secrets of things, and nothing is hidden from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we say that, because that has its implication to the faith of the believers. This has its great implication to the lives of the believers, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows all things. So when all of the affairs, all of the actions, all of the things that happens in this universe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it. He knows our secrets and our openly done actions. So this is how the ibadah is to be established. The worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just for the outside appearance of things. And this meaning is something that we always have to be reminded of. How hidden our hearts are, and the hearts are full of actions. And these actions can be hidden from the human beings. And sometimes it's even hidden within our own selves. Why? Because we are forgetful. When a person is forgetful, being indulged into some materialistic matters, not paying attention to what's in the hearts, a person might ruin his own deeds while he's not paying attention to this. By showing off his actions, for example. By not being sincere for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By not having the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By not being watchful of what's the secrets in our hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that. And that's why we need to be aware of that when we are in our actions, in our state of worship, in our relationship with others, in buying and selling. In all of our affairs, we need to be aware of this, that Allah